Hi, everyone, and welcome to Burl Veritas's webinar for today on PCQI Human Food version 2. So let's get started. Before we get started in full detail here, I do want to give a little bit more information about Burl Veritas and who we are and what we do. So Burl Veritas is a world leader in inspection and certification services. Created in 1828, the group has approximately 82,000 employees located in more than 16,000 offices across the world. Bureau Veritas helps its clients improve their performance by offering services and innovative solutions to ensure that their assets, products, infrastructure, and processes meet standards and regulations in terms of quality, health and safety, environmental protection, and social responsibility. Bureau Veritas is a business to society service company that contributes to positively informing the world we live in. We work closely with our clients to address the critical challenges they face to link these to the emergency aspirations of society. We work with the companies to build and protect their reputations, supporting them as they forge the foundations of trust that are built to last. And just two things I want to hone in here on what we do: inspection and certification. Our inspections involve on-site verification that products, services, assets, and facilities meet specifications and operate as intended. They cover a wide range of services designed to control quality, verify quantities, and meet regulation requirements. Our inspection services help companies have confidence in the reliability and integrity of their products, assets, and systems. And our certification side. As an independent third party and accredited certification body, we provide certification services to attest that management systems, services, and personnel comply with specific standards. Equipment and products can be certified to meet sector-specific or industry standards, international, local, or voluntary standards, or manufacturer or client requirements. Certification enables companies to access new market strengthen their business brands, or simply obtain a license to operate. I do want to go over just a few housekeeping things here. We will be keeping the cameras and microphones off during the webinar. If you have any questions during the entirety of this webinar, please use the Q&A chat box. Make sure we will get those answered at the end here. If we do not get your question answered, I will definitely have one of our speakers reach out to you with that answer. And then also, our webinars will be recorded, and I will be getting out to you after the webinar is completed with the slides and the recording. So let's go ahead and get into our speakers. We have probably two of the best industry speakers here today on this topic. We have Dr. Jose Sable. He has been in the food industry for 30 years. He's been teaching for the past 15 years. He has his own consulting firm, and he has many, many roles in the food industry. And he's also one of our food safety instructors. He has a mechanical engineering background. Jose is dedicated to delivering engaging and informative training sessions that effectively transfer knowledge. And then lastly, here we have Gary Smith, VV's own Director of Food and Safety and Training. Gary Smith brings over 30 years of experience to his leadership in the food and safety industry. Gary has worked as a regulator, buyer, and a supplier. With his diverse background and board perspective, Gary is uniquely equipped to help organizations determine the benefits of certification standards and most practical strategies for compliance. Gary has an extensive list of professional certification and industry memberships that has been effective on several policy influencing committees. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to Dr. Sable here, and we'll get going.
Hello, everybody. So thank you for the introduction, Allison. The word doctor is kind of I'm still, getting used to that. So what we're going to do, and this is going to be my introduction for my, participation in the class, is that those of you that already are PCQIs, because you already took version 1.2 of the class, you just need to rest assured that your certificate is fine and that you are going to be still recognized as a PCQI in the United States, at least, without any problem. If you ask me, Jose, should I take the class again? I will say yes. Okay. Fundamentally, I'm going to say that we need some sort of a refresher. Taking the class with different instructors maybe is going to bring something new to your whatever background or understanding you have at this point in time. But the good thing is that the new version brings in a very fresh and, in my personal opinion, a very effective approach on how to perform a hazard analysis. So I would highly recommend that everybody will take that class again. Okay. As you may know, the curriculum was updated from version 1.2 to version 2.0. In my notes, I have that by, I believe it's July 30th or June 30th of this year, that is going to be the end of version 1.2. And from that time on, version 2.0 is going to be the only option available. One of the things that is, oh my goodness, this is amazing, is that the new curriculum is, I will say, connected or following the 7 principles of Codex Alimentarius. And if you go to the manual, the new manual, in page number 1, there is a section indicating that it is the new class is consistent with the Codex Alimentarius 7 principles of HACCP, according to the version 2022, 2023. Some people says 2022 or 2023. I mean, it's the last version. At this point, I would like to say something. A lot of people said that HACCP is a system. I have a system, a HACCP system, okay? So HACCP, the real source of HACCP is the ISO 31010. HACCP is recognized as a risk assessment technique in ISO. So it's part of that group of documents in ISO 31000 that are being used by facilities implementing systems to analyze and manage risk. That is HACCP, okay? So I'm making this quote or this highlighting this topic is because it is super important for us to start thinking of HACCP as a risk assessment technique because there are many others. And actually, if you go to 31010, you are going to find that there are several limitations to the HACCP technique. And one of them is the way that we determine risk. Okay, and that's why we were having so far, in my personal opinion, so many difficulties in trying to design a consequence likelihood matrix that is going to help us all achieve a proper determination of risk. Okay. With that in mind, the new approach, the version 2 of the class, I believe that, oh my goodness, those guys that developed the guidance and everything, they did an amazing job. Okay, I do believe that the way that the new class teaches hazard analysis is out of this world, is extremely good. I will say that is somehow I can see the connection between the new class and when I'm teaching the fish and the seafood hazard with the fish and fishery products, hazards and controls guidance. I can see that there is some sort of a connection between those two documents, okay? So pretty much the conversation is that now that you have the guidance document, the new one, which was published by, what was that, January of 2024, the last version? This last version, it's significantly better than the one in 2016, which is the previous one. And in order to highlight certain things, in chapter number 2, you're going to have a very good explanation about the general approach of the HACCP, of the principles, the food safety principles, which are HACCP, pretty much. And then in chapter 3, you're going to have an extremely well explanation about hazards and sources of hazards and all of those things where when you use HACCP, the technique, one of the limitations, actually is the first one mentioned in the ISO 31010, says that limitation number 1 is that the hazards must be identified. If people do not have the proper experience to identify those hazards, the hazard analysis is not going to work because people are not going to be identifying all the hazards applicable to all of the food and all of the ingredients and all the processes and all the facility and the environment and so on. So the guidance, and including appendix number 1 of the guidance, which is where we are going to find the tables for the biological hazards of the ingredients and the chemical hazards of the ingredients. And then in A17, which is a section of the appendix number 1 that talks about how to find biological, chemical, and physical hazards related to the activities performed at the facility, process related, and the activities related with the facility itself, with the environment. So now there is a document that if you go to the FSPCA website, you can download in version 2 of the website, you can download a PDF that is going to help you with A17, the way that you choose biological, chemical, and physical hazards for hazard related with the facility and the process. Okay, so pretty much the way that that is being done, it's just amazing, is very helpful. I believe that people with a little bit less experience than others should be able to navigate that guidance extremely well. And I will say that with a little help from outside, they should be getting a quite effective hazard analysis this time. So the integration of the HACCP principles is another thing. I was explaining, Gary, before that I took a class for lawyers, for food lawyers. And when I got a copy of the law, the FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, if you go to the section of the definitions, you are going to find that the first definition that is there is the definition of a critical control point. So the question is very simple. When you read that, is HACCP not applicable in the preventive control regulation? And the answer is no, HACCP is applicable. And anyone that already has in place a very effective, I need to say that first, a very effective HACCP-based system, watch out with the language that I'm using now, HACCP-based system, well, that's okay, that's acceptable, because there are many hazards that you are going to identify, potentially your ingredients or the process, that will be controlled at a specific step or steps of the process. And that is acceptable. That is exactly the definition of a process preventive control. It's a different name, but pretty much is about the same thing. Now, what the law says, that besides those controls that we have within the different steps of the process, it is possible that we may need to control other hazards that are high risk. And I'm going to use the naming HACCP. Those are significant hazards. But in preventive controls, they are hazards that require a preventive control. We have different names, but at the end, it's the same thing. Okay? So whenever you identify those, yes, most of them or some of them are going to be controlled during the process in the different steps of your flow chart. But some of them are not going to be controlled in specific steps, are going to be controlled outside of the process. And those are going to be called, according to the language, the definitions in FSMA, the preventive controls. So now when you look at this way, and you look at the guidance, and you look at the new material, the new version 2 of the class, it makes sense because now it is very clear that HACCP is part of the assessment, not only for the critical control points, which is already defined, but also for any of the other preventive controls. And I'm going to just guess that some of you are already PCQIs. So you know that I'm talking about the allergen, sanitation, and supply chain preventive controls. And be careful, because even though that is not part of the class, in the regulation, the last preventive control is called other preventive controls. And that is to cover certain things that are in the law, that I know that they are in the law, but they are not covering the regulation. So one of the things that I'm doing when I'm teaching the class, I'm always spending a few minutes explaining people the other preventive controls. So the other thing that is very nice about the new class is that those taking the class will go through a knowledge check at the end of each chapter. 1 or 2 questions, but if people is not paying attention, most likely they are not going to be able to answer that question. Okay, so that's another thing that is there. And what else do I have here? Pretty much that's my quick summary. I mean, Gary's going to be talking a little bit more about other details, but that's it for me. Back to you, Allison.
Great. Thank you so much, Jose. Gary, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Jose. I am going to go ahead and share my screen here. Pull up my slides. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Appreciate everyone's time and attention and coming in. And thanks, Jose, for your participation in this. Again, our goal here
Hey, real quick, Gary, can you share?
Yep.
Can you share your a different screen?
Yep. Better?
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, Allison. All right. So our goal here for the webinar is to do 2 things. Kind of what are the updates? I know a lot of folks have been asking. FDA's done a lot of work. The FSPCA did a lot of work on this version 2. Been a long time, couple of years in the making. Say, well, what are the biggest differences? And that was kind of our intent with this webinar, is to explain those. So what Jose just talked about was the incorporation of HACCP much more into the course curriculum. If you recall, for those of you who took version 1.2, it was, as I liken it to, it was a preventive control course that also talked a little bit about hazard analysis and process preventive controls in one of the sessions. It is certainly a much more expanded course now. It's 3 full days, just about 3 full days. What I like to say now, it's a HACCP course that actually has preventive controls discussed in it as well. It's about half and half. If you look at the actual content, about half of it is really focused on a traditional HACCP course that you would take, from any of the providers, and then half of it focuses on the preventive control rule. So it's really been much more expanded and driven into being a true HACCP class itself, including getting recognition from folks like the International HACCP Alliance. SQF is now also recognizing it as a HACCP training, providing the competence for an SQF practitioner in HACCP. So it is much expanded into its teaching of the HACCP principles. But my section of the webinar is to talk a little bit about the use of a hazards guide. So FDA has incorporated, and part of the reason that it took a little longer to come out, as Jose mentioned, January of 2024, as you see there on the screen. FSPCA, the Food Safety Preventive Control Alliance, was just about to release this version 2 document when the hazards guide in January of 2024 came out. So they were like, oh boy, well, now we have to go back, incorporate into the curriculum more about the hazards guide. So that delayed the release really by about 8 months or so, 9 months or so of the updated version 2 content. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what does that look like and what does that mean? So here's what it looks like if you download the PDF. I'm going to have the QR code up in a little bit for everyone to grab. But let's talk. Take a minute and look back to the history of FDA and their hazards guides. What's been their history of providing hazards guides for the industry? Well, if you look back, first off, and you'll notice a theme here in that FDA develops the hazards guide by regulation. So one of the true first HACCP regulations that FDA put out was the seafood HACCP regulation. And with that came a really good, really comprehensive seafood hazards guide published in 1996. Being a HACCP, seafood HACCP trainer myself, as is Jose, I will say it was always a great teaching tool in presenting that course to the seafood industry. You had two books. You had the material book and then the hazards guide. Hazards guide was always an amazing, excellent reference and resource, and still is for the seafood industry. And then they came out with a microbial hazards for fresh fruits and vegetables, 1998. Again, fruit juice. So again, the next big regulation was the fruit juice HACCP rule. So came out with a hazards guide for that in 2004. And then again, we had a lapse. We had obviously on the meat and poultry side, we had the 1998 to 2000, the HACCP rule for meat and poultry. But of course, that's USDA, not FDA. So therefore, there was no FDA hazards guide for that. So no other regulatory activity around food safety management was put forth by FDA until we had the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA, which came out obviously in 2011, but first being implemented into the industry 2015, 2016, somewhere around there. The first FDA guidance document was published in 2016. FDA, put that out there for public comment, got a ton of feedback back, took that in, processed it, et cetera, and then came out with this draft. It's the final draft, but it's not final because there's still pieces of it that are missing. But came out in January 2024, 612 pages, so a little light reading for you at night, sometimes by your bedside. But the intent of the hazards guide is to assist industry in the completion of their hazard analysis in the food safety plan. And again, that's one big incorporation in version 2 is the emphasis on the hazard analysis. I mean, it was always important in version 1.2, but it really is driven home in version 2 that is where, the buck stops here, the rubber meets the road, whatever saying you want to put to say, this is where it all matters. Getting the hazard analysis right will set you up to succeed in building your food safety plan, or enable you to fail, or destine you to fail if you do it poorly, right? So it's the hazard analysis. They have a whole new revamped session. It's a huge big session. It's like 2 hours of training specifically required by the instructors to focus on conducting that hazard analysis and doing it well. And the hazards guide is meant to be the supplement, to be the reference, to be the tool to help industry in doing that hazard analysis really well. So if you look at the hazard analysis itself, or the hazards guide itself, again, it's to provide a guidance in the building, and not just of what are the hazards, but the whole food safety plan. You see, chapter 1 is, how to do that. What does a food safety plan need to have? Chapter 2, conducting that hazard analysis. Again, that is the key critical step. It's chapter 6 in the PCQI manual. It's chapter 2 here in the hazards guide. They go, supplement each other. And then you see, the rest of the table of contents there of the hazards guide. Preventive control and supply chain, process preventive controls, supply chain preventive controls are in there now, as you see that now. Some preventive controls haven't been published yet, like chemical preventive controls, physical hazard, their process preventive controls. But how to identify those hazards, right? How to identify the chemical hazards, how to identify the physical hazards, the sanitation preventive control, not yet published that. So you see that there in chapter 12 coming soon, chapter 13 coming soon, the validation of a process control for bacterial pathogen coming soon. That'll be a really, great tool and topic pick for us as a reference for the industry. So you see probably 60-70% of it has been published. The rest of it is still to be determined and coming soon there, as you see there. So some of the benefits of using the guide, and actually, as I was preparing for this and digging through the hazard analysis, we have a lot of new folks on our food safety team, and I'm definitely going to dig out the acronym table and use it for my team, because as every industry does, right? We have our own acronyms, and whenever we're talking, especially to people who aren't, completely in the industry, we use these acronyms just like everyone should know exactly what, FSP. FSVP stands for, and what does SQF stand for, and what does PCQI stand for, and of course everyone knows RTE and all these things that normal people don't know these things. But anyway, so it's got a great acronym guide. It's like 3 or 4 pages long. Great references, not a lot of website references, a lot of different references globally within the within the food industry of different things to pull up for all different kinds of different bits of information. Big glossary, of course, a lot of definitions. We'll talk more about that in just a sec. But it's really, really a lot of preliminary information in there, a lot of really good information just to help people get indoctrinated into the food safety world and in the food industry. Give some specific examples when you go in and you're looking at things like the process preventive control section there. It's, talks about cookies as an example with batch process versus continual process. What are the differences? What are different things to think about from a hazard standpoint? Ready-to-eat soups, vegetable salsa. And one of the big key benefits is going to be, and I know FDA really hammered this in our version 2 instructor training, was it's going to allow us to move beyond, and even, in talking to some of our CPO friends this week, SQF and FSSE and BRCGS, the listing in the hazard analysis when auditors and consultants and sites are looking at their food safety plans and seeing the generic, microbiological hazard or chemical hazard or physical hazard listed in a hazard analysis without saying, okay, well, which microbiological hazard, which chemical hazard, which physical hazard, because the hazard that you pick has different control mechanisms, and it matters which one, is it an input, is your process. So this guide gets past the generic use of micro, chemical, and physical and helps the sites identify, well, which microbiological hazard do I need to worry about? Which chemical hazard do I need to worry about? Which physical hazard do I need to worry about? And then it also, within the chapters, really gives great examples of what should a critical limit be? What should a good monitoring strategy be? What would records be looking like? What would verification and validations for these types of industries controlling these types of hazards? What should that look like? And one of the other benefits of the guide that I don't have listed here is this is how FDA and their state affiliates, right? The folks who are doing those state, FDA inspections on behalf of FDA at the state level, this is how they're trained. Right? This is what they're trained on. This is what the industry should know and should be at the level of performance for meeting the regulation. So, yes, this isn't the regulation, but this is how the inspectors, the FDA and state level inspectors, this is what they're trained with. This is the tools they're trained with. So this is if you want to know what the inspectors know, right? Know what the auditors know. This is what the auditors are learning. So this is a great tool for you to understand what it is that, the folks who are coming in and asking you those questions, what it is they're going to be asking you. Great reference to the actual regulation. Again, you see here, this is from the supply chain chapter. And you see some definitions of a qualified auditor. What's, right out of the regulation, what's the definition of a qualified auditor? Right out of the regulation, what's the definition of a qualified facility, right? Qualified facility, for those of us who remember, are those really small suppliers. How do they become qualified so that they're exempt from some of the parts of FSMA? They have a process they have to go through and they have criteria they have to meet, right? What's a supplier? What's a receiving facility? All of those are very specific definitions. And not only are they in the regulation, of course, but they're also in the hazards guide. And when you go to I want to learn more about how to set up, a supply chain preventive control, you go to that chapter in the hazards guide, and here's the definitions, here's the regulations, here's guidance built into that guidance document to help you to do that, right? So you see here an example. Now this is chapter 15 of the guidance of the hazards guide. Requirement to establish a supply chain program, which is right out of the regulation 21 CFR 117 Part G. So Part G, that's the requirement to have a supply chain program. So that's the rule. So this is a blend between the rule and guidance, right? Here's what the rule says. Now here's what it means, and here's what it means to you, and here's what you have to do to comply with it. So it's a great tool to blend in here's the stuffy, hard to read regulation. And now here's what it means as far as how to interpret it. And again, these are what the instructors are being trained on. What are they going to come out and start asking us about when it comes to compliance to the rule, right? So great tool that way. So one of the things that Jose had mentioned, and I say probably, I mean, there's a lot of great tools at the beginning, and there's a whole lot of great information in there, but probably for me, one of the most valuable pieces is Appendix 1. So Appendix 1 is at the end, probably starts around, I don't know, page 510 or something like that, and flows through the rest of the document. And it is the identification of the hazards, microbiological, chemical, and physical, for all different types of commodity types. And the commodity types are listed there. So not everything is listed. One thing I do know, one thing I do want to mention that is not here, unfortunately, but it makes sense, I guess, because this is the human food hazards guide. And the human food PCQI course was the one that was updated. This is not for animal food. This is not for pet food. So unfortunately, that industry of human food and pet food do not yet have a hazards guide as established or built by the FDA. Now, I know there's plenty of, for anybody who's in that, the animal food or pet food industry, there's plenty of documents and guidance and information from associations like AFIA and some of those folks that are out there. But this only focuses on human food. It does not focus on animal food. So unfortunately, there's no FDA endorsed or documented guidance document for the animal food industry yet. And I did ask the question again for anybody who's in the animal food world. I did ask the question when we were going with FSPCA to say, hey, now human food is updated to version 2.0. Is there going to be a 2.0 animal food PCQI course? And they kind of got a funny look on their face and said, yeah, not in our lifetime. So I would assume that won't be happening for a while to update the version. I think they're only on version 1.1 actually of the animal food criteria course. But anyway, the PCQI course. But anyway, back to human food. So this is human food, and the commodities include bakery items, beverage items. So each chart, so you'll see like table 1E is for dairy, and you'll notice like if bakeries A, beverage B, food additives C, chocolate and candy D, dairy would be E. So this is table 1E, dairy. So each group has their own table within Appendix 1. So bakery items have a table, beverage items have a table, food additives have a table, all the way down. You can read the list. Interesting note, game meat products. You might say meat products. I thought that was USDA. Meat items are USDA, beef, pork, poultry, but game meat items, bison, elk, USDA, venison, USDA, or FDA. FDA manages the game meat items, bison, elk, venison, whereas USDA does the commercial meat items, beef, pork, poultry. Okay, so we got the nuts, seeds, oils, snacks, soups, and so. So again, now not every, you might say, well, my industry is not listed there. What should I do? I would say, well, get the one that's the closest to what you do, and work within that. Now let's take a look at the table and look and see what's there. Notice some really good information in the comments, right? There's a lot of milk and butters listed there under dairy. You say, well, what are the differences? it talks about, is it heavy whipping cream? Is it, is it a spread? Is it a blend? Is it sour cream? Is it yogurt? There's a lot of different kind of dairy items, as we know, right? And each one may have different hazards associated with it, different processes, certainly associated with it. And notice within the table, we have the specific microbiological pathogens identified, right? Of course, salmonella and listeria, those are at the top of everybody's very long list. But in some cases you might have Staphylococcus aureus for a spread or a blend, where a Staphylococcus aureus wouldn't be an issue in more of a fluid milk, for example. And notice raw milk has pretty much all of them, but so not a good idea to consume raw milk. But anyway, so different pathogens listed there, and again, that goes down for all of those different commodities that are listed there. Each with a great description of this is what it means, and this is meant to be a tool for your food safety team, your HACCP team, sitting around either to build your new food safety plan or to revise your current food safety plan. The intent is use these tables, find your product type when you're sitting down with your HACCP team and say, okay, HACCP team, have we considered, let's say we're making sour cream. Have we considered, we probably considered listeria, we probably considered salmonella, we probably considered pathogenic E. coli. So it validated that these are the hazards that we considered, and this is what FDA says, this is what we should be considering. Or maybe we're making, again, some kind of a almond spread or something like that, or some kind of a dairy-based spread. And we look at this as our HACCP team, and we're like, wow, we didn't consider Staphylococcus aureus. FDA says maybe we should. Let's learn a little bit about that. Let's look up some information. Let's call a consultant. Let's get somebody out here who knows a little bit about why do we need to be worried about staph, because we never thought about it before. That's the intent of using this tool, is to either reinforce with your HACCP team that, yeah, you guys were right. You were right on. These are the hazards that you thought about. You were correct. Or, hey, here's a few that maybe you didn't consider that you should have. And we go on to the chemical side. And again, same commodities, all the same commodities that we just listed before. Microbiological hazards. Then we switch over to chemical hazards, and you'll see now we're jumping into fruit and veggies, right? And again, what types of fruits and vegetables? It depends. Different hazards associated with different product types. So different for fruits and vegetables, different thoughts process there. And then we go now. I didn't have a physical one there, but I'm sure you'll different process types. Again, you'll have metal, wood, glass, plastic, stones, again, depending on how it comes to you and whatnot. So, and what FDA kind of has done now is they've kind of wrapped this all together. And, as a summary almost of all the 100 pages of Appendix 1 in the Hazards Guide, this is a document that is available from the FSPCA website. It's also handed out during the version 2 course to all attendees. So say if you take all that information from Appendix 1, you take all that information from what hazards with different types of processes, and you boil it down into one page, this is the one page, right? This is the here's the most common process-related hazards, not inputs. So this is process-related, not, based off of ingredients, but based off of what the industry, puts together when they create products. This is the most common hazards that are associated within the food industry, from the biological standpoint, from the chemical standpoint, and from the physical standpoint. And you see they're referencing the different tables that we just went over, table A1 through, 7.1. 7.2, 7.3. So process related. And again, the previous tables were more input related, whereas these are more process related. Okay. So again, the intention here is use these documents. The next HACCP team meeting that, you have to have them at least, for most cases, best practices, have them once a year. Sit down with your HACCP team, get out the hazard guide and say, okay, let's look at our hazard analysis. Here's all the assumptions we made. Here's the decisions we made. Let's compare it against what the FDA is saying, and we can either validate that, hey, we did a great job, or, FDA is saying you might want to consider a few other things in your thought process when it comes to your food safety plan. So I'm going to leave up here for just a second as I summarize. This is the QR code. So if you got your little cameras out there, you can actually snap right there on the QR code, and that will take you right to the FDA Hazards Guide, January 2024. So you're on, and there's a lot on there. So on the FDA's website, it can be a little confusing. You're on the right one when it's January 2024, and it's 612 pages. So again, there's a few versions out there. You want the latest one, which is January 2024, 612 pages, but that QR code should take you right to that. So I'll leave that up for a minute as we talk about, again, in summary of our conversations. And again, we thank you all for your attention. The first point is, the FSPCA did a lot of great work. As Jose had mentioned, a lot of work went into updating version 2. They really made it a much more of a HACCP principle-based foundational course with the preventive controls of supply chain and sanitation, and allergen incorporated into that, as opposed to before it was a preventive control class. And we mentioned HACCP a little bit. Now it's a HACCP class that also mentions and explains the other preventive controls of allergen, sanitation, and supply chain. So it's much more based on, the 7 principles of HACCP, and each one is covered extensively. Second point is, the hazards guide has got a lot of it is completed. The intent, it's for human food facilities, unfortunately not for animal food yet. Hopefully they'll get one someday, but right now it's for the human food facilities, and it is a really great reference tool for sites in either creating your food safety plan or reviewing your food safety plan. I highly recommend, your next food safety team meeting, HACCP team meeting, when you're doing a reassessment of your HACCP plan, which we all have to do. Pull up that hazards guide, find your product, find your scope, find, your product of interest, pull up that information, print it out, have it on, your monitor or whatever, to really go over that with your food safety team to teach them, hey, this is out there. And, again, hopefully most of the time you're congratulating them, saying, hey, we did a great job. Everything FDA thought of, we thought of ourselves. Maybe there's a few things you missed. That's the intent. As a HACCP team, you think about, hey, what about this? What about this? They said, think about this. What do we think? So use this as a reference. No one can know everything about everything. So FDA is giving you a document to help you fill in the blanks, fill in the gaps of what do I need to know about the risks associated with the products we produce. And definitely, again, sites should utilize, the hazards guidance document. Access it there. You can get it right there off the QR code. Jose mentioned the comment of should I take the version 2 class if I took version 1.2? I would say this. I would say many times, people would take or had the choice between, do I take a HACCP class or do I take a PCQI class? Well, I have to take a PCQI class because the regulation basically, it doesn't tell me I have to, but essentially it kind of says you have to have a PCQI, and that's how you become one, by taking the class. So you might say, well, so instead of HACCP, I'm going to take version 1.2 of PCQI. So I would say this. I would say if you've never had a HACCP class and you only took the PCQI version 1.2, I would recommend you take version 2. Because it really is a HACCP class plus a reinforcement of the preventive controls. So it really gets much more into that risk assessment, hazard analysis discussion like Jose was mentioning earlier on. If you've had a HACCP class and you've had version 1.2, do you need to take version 2? Probably not. Doesn't hurt anything, but I would say probably not. If you're really comfortable with those 7 principles of HACCP and you're really comfortable understanding, the risk abasement, the risk assessment and the hazard analysis and how to work through that, then you don't need version 2. But if you've only, if you're newer to the industry and, you're either looking to take some training class, hey, do I need to take a HACCP class or version 2? Take version 2. You don't need the HACCP class because it's incorporated into it now. So that would be my recommendation for those of you who are thinking, hey, do I need to take this version 2 class? I would say, if you've never had a HACCP class, I would recommend taking it. If you've had a HACCP class and you also had version 1.2, you probably don't need it. Now, it doesn't, again, as Jose mentioned, it doesn't make your version 1.2 certificates invalid. They're still solid. FDA will still, recognize them. They don't go away. But it's really more of, what is your comfort level with performing those tasks of that hazard analysis and identification of those hazards. And again, the hazards guide is a great, great tool to assist you in doing that. So with that, I will turn it back over to Allison, and we can see if we have any other questions.
All right. Thank you, Gary. And just to piggyback off what you just said there, we are offering the PCQI Human Food version 2 course in March 12th through the 14th. And just like Gary said, if you need that extra confidence, definitely take that course. All right. So we do have a few questions here. First one is it required for sites to have a copy of the FDA hazard guide in their food and safety plan?
Jose, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So no, none of these documents are a mandatory to have in printed. I mean, we're supposed to be using that, like Gary was saying, just to, improve whatever we have right now.
Okay, cool. And Gary, will the new PCQI Human Food version 2 be recognized by SQF as being a HACCP training for SQF practitioner?
Yeah, good question. So SQF is coming out with a new version, version 10. I've been working on one of their technical working groups and coming up with the criteria around the practitioner. What they've basically done is they've said, they don't say a practitioner has to have HACCP training anymore. So in version 9, it does. Current version, it does. Version 10, what it will say is the practitioner must be competent in HACCP knowledge and principles. And their understanding is that version 2 satisfies that requirement as far as the learning. Now, the practitioner still has to have that understanding. They have to be competent. They have to know, but it's a great tool, 3 days of learning. It's a great tool to help them. So, currently, there's a lot of confusion over, if I'm a practitioner, do I need a HACCP certificate and a version 1.2 certificate? And really the answer is probably, yeah, you probably do, because the HACCP, SQF says you have to, as a practitioner, you have to have HACCP training. And currently SQF does not recognize version 1.2 as equivalent to HACCP training because it really isn't. So for version 9 and today, the answer is you have to have both. The good news for version 10 and beyond practitioners, or any new practitioners coming into version 10, you'll only need to take the one. You'll only need to take version 10, and that will satisfy, or version 2, and that will satisfy SQF in the future. So, and again, version 10 SQF should be out for public comment. So probably by February of March of this year, look to this space. We will certainly be having a webinar with SQF on version 10 updates sometime this summer, but it will be applicable starting in 2026. So.
Yeah, great. And then one last question here, Gary. It says, can sites reference the FDA Hazards Guide as a resource of information within their food safety plan for the PCP or critical limit determination?
Yes, absolutely they can. So that is an excellent source of reference, because so that really can be your validation. So that's a great, you might say, well, where'd you come up with this temperature, or where'd you get this critical limit? So I got it from the hazards guide. Okay. As an auditor or as an inspector or whatnot, okay. Yeah, the hazards guide can be that validation of that critical control point, that critical limit. Here's why I picked that, right? Validation is proving that whatever you said you're going to do is going to be effective. It's going to work. Well, FDA told me this is what I'm supposed to do. They told me that through this hazards guide. So this is where you can validate your food safety plan based off of using the hazards guide.
Great.
And let me add something, Allison, to Gary's comment. If you go to the guidance document and you go to appendix number 3, at least for biological hazards, you have the, water activity, minimum pH, maximum pH for the validation, again, of the controls for the biological hazards.
So it can make the process of having to have validation, which is required for SQF, FSSC, BRCGS. All food safety, all standards require food safety plans to be validated. FSMA requires our food safety plans to be validated, and the process preventive controls, or the CCPs, all must be validated. The hazards guide is a great tool to help you to validate those procedures and activities.
Okay. All right. Well, I believe that's going to conclude our webinar today. I want to say thank you to Dr. Sable and Gary Smith for helping us out with this webinar. It's very knowledgeable. If you do have any questions, don't feel free to email us. We can get back with you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time today.
Thanks,
I really do
everyone. Thanks for
appreciate
your
it.
attention. Have a great Friday.
Thank you.